Once upon a time there was a young maiden named Serendipity. Serendipity was a beautiful young girl. She grew up in a castle all alone. Her parents had died when she was but a young girl, but she had a friend unlike any other, a young dragon named Pete. Pete was just a young dragon when Serendipity met him, and she raised him as her own, a very unlikely pet, but a loyal one at best. Serendipity and Pete were inseparable. They traveled everywhere together. One day Serendipity was told that a prince from afar was coming to marry her. He had heard of her beauty, and stories of her kindness and her gentleness had gone out into the lands. He knew that Serendipity was the kind of wife that he wanted, and so he had arranged to come and to marry her. As the prince traveled across the lands, he came upon a deep, dark forest in which there were dwarfs. These dwarfs played all kinds of games on the prince. They tied him up and they kept him there. Serendipity wondered where her prince was. He was supposed to come and marry her, but he never showed. So she set out with her dragon to find out where he was. As she crossed the hills and the rivers of her land, she saw the beauty that existed there. She came to the edge of a deep, dark forest, and while she should have been afraid, she wasn't. After all, she had her friendly pet Pete with her. Pete promised to protect her and to keep her safe, so as they entered the forest and saw little dwarfs running around, they were not surprised. In fact, Serendipity wasn't even afraid. She stopped one of the little dwarfs and she said, "Have you seen my friend? He's a prince from another land." The little dwarf ignored her question and ran off. Serendipity walked further into the forest, thinking that she might be close to an answer where her prince was. She came upon the dwarf village, and from afar she could see her prince. He was tied up on the other side of the campfire. Serendipity walked in, and they were amazed at her beauty. In fact, they were so stunned they didn't even remember that they had the prince tied up on the other side of the fire. Serendipity began to tell stories, and then the fire-breathing dragon blew fire out of his nose. All of the dwarfs were terrified and ran off. In the moment, Serendipity ran over to the prince and she untied him, and she said, "Are you Prince Philip?" He replied, "Yes." She said, "I am Princess Serendipity, the one that you are to marry." The prince was so glad to see her. Both the dragon and Serendipity quickly got the prince out of there. They escaped the forest and they headed back to her castle where they could be married. On the way, they were set upon by thieves. The dragon breathed fire at the thieves, but the thieves shot arrows at both Serendipity and the prince, and they were killed. The poor dragon, all he wanted to do was protect Serendipity. He wanted to keep her safe, but instead he couldn't thwart the arrows that came and pierced her heart and took her life. As he arrived back at the castle, he laid in the field outside of the castle where the vineyards were that they played in as children. Giant tears of sorrow flew from his eyes. As he laid there in the dirt, the dragon's tears soaked deep into the soil, so deeply that no crop would ever grow there again. The dragon's sorrow was too much to bear. The castle would never know a lives filled with joy, such as Prince Philip's and Princess Serendipity. Their lives had been cut short, and now the dragon would just remember them until the end of his days.